Hello! Thank you for joining me. Today's video is going to be about whether you should dress up to go to church. And there's a lot of heart issues involved in this question, and there's a little bit different perspective I'd like to give you than perhaps what you've heard before. Now, I know some people are real traditional and they think you just have to dress up. You have to wear a suit and tie to go to church. You have to dress a certain way. And now there are churches where people go to church in a pair of shorts and t-shirt, and they have this come as you are. They dress casual or whatever, and they go to church that way. And some of the people who dress up maybe think the other way is unspiritual, and the people who don't dress up too much think the other way is kind of stuffy and religious and focuses on externals and all that kind of stuff. So I'd like for us to explore some of these issues and be concerned with it. Now or consider it. I've read. I don't. The source I read it in didn't really have any citations or anything at the bottom. So, but I've read that the Presbyterian robes actually come from the basic, your basic business suit or your average, your daily wear from the time of John Calvin. That's what people wore, and they didn't wear vestments in their church there in Geneva. And that somehow that got stuck and that became the attire. I don't know if that's true or not, but I suspect a lot of the religious attire evolved in that way, like monks' garments. Probably at some time people were wearing tunics, and the brown tunic was just very simple, plain clothing that someone who is poor might wear, and then now it becomes some really separate type of clothing. And the same thing with Amish clothing. At some point that was probably the plain, simple clothing. They tried to dress simply, not to dress in some unusual, archaic way, but they kept dressing that way for a few hundred years, and now you have the Amish clothing. I would say that about Quakers, but Quakers wear normal clothes, and the William Penn picture is just that the Quaker Oats guy. That's a picture of somebody that lived 300 or 400 years ago, William Penn. So, that's what he wore back then. So Quakers, don't dress like that. But as far as I know, anyway, so. The issue of whether to dress up to please the Lord. Now, hopefully as a Christian, we want to do what's right to please the Lord. I know a lot of people, when they want to give money in church, let's say they're going to pull out a 20 and they want to give it in the offering plate, or they want to give it to the poor as a gift to the Lord, or they want to give it to a preacher they know, or a brother or sister they know. They want to give them a $20 or $100 handshake, that they'll pick out the best bill out of their wallet, the newest, the crispest, the nicest one, out of a heart to give to the Lord the best that they have. And in the Old Testament, you're supposed to give the good sheep, the best that you have, the good sheep, not the blind sheep or the lame sheep or whatever, as a sacrifice. So that should be in our heart to give the best to the Lord. The question is dressing up in a suit and tie or dressing up in fancy clothes, the most expensive clothes we can get, is that the best for the Lord? Is that what the Lord wants? Now, in the Old Testament, I just noticed, as far as I recall, there's no specific requirement for what you have to wear to go to the temple, that they could wear, just your regular clothes that you would wear anywhere. But all Jews, they were supposed to wear, Hebrews were supposed to wear 100% of one kind. You couldn't mix cotton and flax, but that was all the time, not just in the temple. And then the priests, of course, had the special clothing that they were supposed to wear. If anybody is aware of anything in the Old Testament that says you have to wear your Sunday best or Saturday best or whatever to go to the temple, please let me know. I'm not aware that they had a dress code. Because you see in Israel they would have very rich people and they would have very poor people, and if you had a dress code, then how could the poor people go into the temple? Now I've heard that in later centuries that they did wear clean clothes to the temple, that a person going to the temple would walk through a type of a baptismal pool, take the clothing off and put on new clothes and go through the pool, and then go put on new clothing to go into the temple after they just cleansed themselves, and there was an attendant who would deliver the new clothing to them at the other end and all this stuff. Perhaps that was the case in the time of Christ, but I don't know of any Old Testament laws about that. So let's get to the issue. When it comes to what we should wear to church, now there are statements in the New Testament from Peter warned that women let their adorning not be that outward adorning of putting on gold or silver, and there's verse about wearing pearls and all this kind of stuff that Paul wrote to Timothy. And so there is a concern that you could dress up to go to church, and you could put on your Rolex watch, or you could put on your fancy schmancy clothes. You're going to put on these rich clothes to display your wealth and show everybody how wealthy you are. And that's not a good attitude. And that can, if you're, there are poor people that go to your church and you're dressing up in a way to display your wealth, that may be displeasing to the Lord. And a lot of this is an attitude of the heart. And some people, they may have a good attitude and they may not be aware that the way you dress can actually sort of create a barrier between you and other people. And by the same token, I mean, you could just, nobody else is dressed in rags, and you go in just wearing rags just to get attention and draw attention to yourself, and create some sort of with some improper motive behind that. That's a possibility as well. But when it comes to what we wear in church, I can find one passage in the Bible that I think that speaks to this situation. James chapter 2. My brothers, as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, don't show favoritism. By the way, I'm reading from the NIV today. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here is a good seat for you," but say to the poor man, "You stand there," or "Sit on the floor by my feet." The King James says to sit under my footstool. So he uses footstool. Have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? So now I was aware of I heard a story about a church overseas that they had a rule that if you wanted to minister in music, you had to wear a white long sleeve dress shirt. And if you didn't wear that, you couldn't minister in music. And there's a really poor homeless guy, I don't know, maybe quasi-homeless guy or whatever, who collected cans and all that kind of stuff off the street. And he had gotten somebody thrown out a trumpet, or somehow he had gotten a hold of a trumpet, and he could really play that thing. He became a Christian. He had this trumpet, and he went to try out for their music team program, and he played the trumpet, and it was so beautiful. And they said, "This is wonderful. We want you to come play." But then he heard about this rule that they had to wear a white shirt. And he was so poor, he did not own a white dress shirt. And fortunately, the other people in the church found out, and they bought him one. And then he played on the music team. But, what about all the other trumpet players or guitar players, possibly that might have been out there, that were in the same situation, who withdrew from the music team because they didn't have a white long sleeve shirt? In this country, there are villages where people don't have a white long sleeve shirt. And if you take that system to the village, little rules like this can create a distinction between the rich and the poor and exclude the poor. And the Lord doesn't want us to exclude the poor. So there may be somebody who says, "I'm going to do my best for the Lord. I'm going to wear my best clothes. I'm going to dress up and go to church." And that's their heart. And maybe in their heart, they're wanting to please the Lord. And I'm not saying it's wrong to dress up to go to church. And, maybe they're doing that with the right attitude before the Lord. But what would be wrong is if you dress up and you have a judgmental attitude, and you see somebody not dressed up coming to church and say, "That person's wearing a t-shirt," or "They're wearing a pair of blue jeans," and you get offended and you think poorly of that person, then that's a problem, because maybe that person doesn't have a suit. And maybe they're poor and they don't have money. And there are poor people, and there are people in the United States even, and there are people in the developed world who, it's a given point in time, when maybe they become a new believer or whatever, and they don't have money, and they don't have a suit in their closet. And there are people like that who don't have suits. That's a real situation. And there are also people who don't own suits, who don't go to church and might get invited to church. So there are some churches that purposefully wear reasonable casual clothing to make it comfortable for anybody to come to church, because there's some people who don't wear suits. They just don't wear suits to work. They don't wear suits wherever. They don't wear a tie. So and there's some young people who just kick around in the summertime with a pair of shorts and t-shirt, and they wear jeans in the wintertime, and they just don't have any dress clothes at all, and it's just athletic shoes all the time. So we have to be aware of these things. And I believe it's just as acceptable to the Lord if we purposefully dress down a little bit in order to make it comfortable for other people, so they don't, the guy doesn't come in a ratty pair of tennis shoes and a t-shirt and a pair of shorts and come into a suit full of, a room full of suits and fancy clothes and feel uncomfortable. That's perfectly fine. So the Lord has not commanded us to wear fancy clothes when we go to church. I've heard that people wore fancy clothes because when they went to church at a fine cathedral, there's a possibility a nobleman might stop by and they wanted to dress up for the nobility who dropped in. Maybe that's where it came from. I don't know. But if the Lord does not require us or command us to wear your Sunday best or whatever, whenever you go to some sort of a church meeting, then you can't judge other people for that. Now, if you want to dress nicely to please the Lord, as long as you're obedient to the Word and the Gospel, when you do so, and you dress up neatly, and you do it in your heart unto the Lord, read Romans 14, you do it in your heart to the Lord, good for you. But don't condemn the person who dresses down, and don't condemn somebody who comes in with vile raiment, with shabby clothes, because they're not dressed up. Because the Bible specifically warns against discriminating against somebody because they're wearing poor clothing. And this is something we need to be concerned about, because that's a sensitive issue on the Lord's heart. And while I'm on the topic, this is a little bit off of the topic of clothing, as churches need to be careful as well with what they do with programs where you have to pay money to go there. And as a graduate student, now I've got, the Lord's taking care of me, He's provided for me. But there have been times in my graduate student experience where if there's something that costs $20, I was like, oh man, we can't do that. That's $20. Where are we going to get that? You look at your budget at the end. And I've had things where people just giving me money and things to provide, but I try not to shell out money. And then there are these church conferences that you can go to, or religious events, and you got to pay $20, you got to pay $40, you got to pay $50, you got to pay $30. Church retreats, and they can be kind of expensive, $100. And for most people, that's chump change. But there are ways I know it's expensive whenever a church puts on an event like this. It costs money. You have to, and so a lot of churches, they'll have you rent a room in a conference center. I mean, that's the only way you can go to the conferences. You have to stay somewhere. And some churches will work to find, different prices for accommodations. But especially if it's the same church and you're the same people, why don't you say, okay, here's how much it costs for a room, and we estimate there may be 20% of people here who can't afford to go, and take up some kind of offering and write down your name. I'm planning to go, and tell everybody, if you can't afford to go, we'll help you, but make sure when you're writing down your name, we're taking this as a serious sign that you're, if Lord willing, you're going to come, and you have all intentions to come, and try to get them, to commit and realize that people are donating money. Money's being earmarked for them that could go to someone else if they don't go, and all the, so they take it seriously. Because, one reason churches will ask for them funds is because if people pay a little money, they're much more likely to attend the event, and it's a measure of seriousness. But I believe there's other ways around to do that. You'll have youth group trips that'll go skiing, and especially in my household, when I was a teenager, if I wanted to go off on a trip, if I were working, my parents would expect me to, I had a part-time job. I was expected to manage my money and to save for this and to put away money for that. And by the time I got to be 16 or 17, I went through periods where I didn't have a part-time job and I had to do this. But I really hated to go to mom and dad and ask for money. I work, I get a paycheck, and then that was the money that I would use for my, going out and recreational stuff. And my parents took care of clothes and all the necessities, So anyway, for a lot of and for teenagers who live in a home with a single mom, and they don't have a part-time job, or they have to pay, their insurance money or whatever with that part-time job money. And then there's some kind of church retreat, and they have to pay $150, $200, or whatever to go on a whitewater retreat, and then go, hear the gospel preached to them, pay $100 for it or whatever. Then that's going to exclude some of the poor. So that's something else we need to be aware of. And if you're in a church and there's a situation where there's poor people who don't have enough money, and you have money, why don't you step up and say, hey, I'll donate some money for people who can afford to go. I remember one time I was in a foreign country, and we were having a Bible study, and one of the expats said, we just ate, we ate food, and they said, can everybody donate some money? And we recommended donation was about $2, which was for people for people there in their economy, that's like $20 or $30 at the time. That was a lot of money for them, and I saw the look of shock on some faces, and it was kind of an open type meeting. I said, if you don't have that, don't worry. Some other people will give more money. So if if you're guests and you don't have money for that, that's fine. And then of course give more money to cover other people, because that's a really sensitive issue, and we don't want to create division when we're eating with other brothers, or just anything that we do together as a church. So God bless you, and I hope this video is a blessing to you. And if you think this will be a blessing to somebody else, copy the link and email it to them and tell them about it. Thanks a lot.